Before I start, I want you to know that what I'm about to tell you actually happened to me. I've never shared this publicly before, and honestly, I still get chills thinking about it. This took place about 3 years ago when I was working as a security guard at an old office building in downtown. I'm not going to use real names or the actual location because, well, you'll understand why by the end of this story. So let me take you back to October 2021. I had just gotten hired as a night security guard at the Hartwell building. It was one of those old 1950s office buildings. 7 stories, Art Deco architecture, the whole 9 yards. Beautiful building, honestly, but it had been mostly vacant for about 5 years. Only the bottom 2 floors were occupied by a small law firm and an accounting office. The job was simple. I worked the graveyard shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., 5 nights a week. My duties were basically just walking the floors every 2 hours, checking doors, making sure no pipes burst, no windows broken, you know, typical security stuff. The pay was decent for what it was, and I needed the money. The first week was uneventful. Boring, actually. I'd make my rounds, spend time in the security office on the first floor watching old movies on my laptop, eat my lunch around 3 a.m., make another round. Rinse and repeat. But they were small things, little details I noticed that seemed off. The building was too quiet. I know that sounds stupid. Of course an empty building at night is quiet. But this was different. It was like the silence had weight to it, like the air itself was holding its breath. And the temperature, it fluctuated weirdly. The 3rd floor was always freezing, even though the heating system showed it was working fine. The 5th floor was uncomfortably warm. It didn't make sense. But the weirdest thing? The smell on the 6th floor. Every time I went up there during my rounds, there was this faint smell of cigarette smoke. Not fresh smoke, old smoke, like it had been absorbed into the walls decades ago. But here's the thing. The entire building had been non-smoking for over 20 years. I checked. I mentioned it to my supervisor, Mike, at the end of my first week. He just laughed it off. Old buildings, man. They hold on to smells. Don't worry about it. I should have paid more attention to how quickly he changed the subject. Everything changed on my 9th night. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Tuesdays were always the deadest nights. I'd done my 1 a.m. round without incident. At around 2:30 a.m. I was back in the security office, halfway through a sandwich, when I heard it. A thump from upstairs. I paused, listening. Nothing. Just that heavy silence again. There it was again. It sounded like it was coming from the 4th floor, maybe? Or the 5th? Now, I'd heard the buildings settle before. Old buildings do that. They creak. They groan. But this was different. This sounded deliberate. Like someone had dropped something heavy. I grabbed my flashlight and headed to the elevator. The security office had monitors, but half of them didn't work, and the ones that did only covered the lobby, the stairwells, and a few hallway intersections. Plenty of blind spots. The elevator ride up felt longer than usual. I pressed the button for the 4th floor. As I ascended, I noticed my reflection in the elevator's polished doors. I looked nervous. I remember thinking that was stupid. It was probably just a radiator or something. The doors opened to the 4th floor. Darkness. The emergency lights were on, giving everything that sickly green glow, but the main lights were off like they should be. I stepped out, my footsteps echoing on the old tile floor. "Security!" I called out. My voice sounded small. Nothing. I started walking the floor, checking doors, shining my flashlight into offices. Everything looked normal. Desks, filing cabinets, ancient computers covered in dust. All the doors were locked, just like they should be. I was about to head back to the elevator when I heard something that made my blood run cold. A child's laughter. It came from above me, from the 5th floor. I stood there, frozen, my flashlight beam trembling slightly. I waited, listening so hard my ears hurt. Silence. I don't know how long I stood there. Could have been 30 seconds, could have been 5 minutes. Finally, I moved to the stairwell door. I didn't want to wait for the elevator, and climbed up to the 5th floor. The 5th floor was warm, like always. Uncomfortably warm. I could feel sweat starting to bead on my forehead as I stepped into the hallway. "Hello?" I called out. "This is security. If someone's up here, you need to identify yourself." There, to my left, the sound of footsteps, quick and light, moving away from me. "Hey!" I shouted, taking off in that direction. "Stop!" I ran down the hallway, my flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. I turned a corner and... nothing. The hallway was empty. A dead end. There was nowhere for anyone to go except back past me, and I would have seen them. I checked every door, all locked. All the offices were empty. I stood there, trying to rationalize what I'd heard. Maybe it was pipes. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe the building's acoustics were just weird and sounds were carrying from outside. But I didn't believe any of that, because I could still feel it, that sensation of being watched, of not being alone. That's when I noticed the door at the end of the hallway, the one to the fire escape. It was slightly ajar. I knew I had checked that door. I knew it had been closed. I walked up to it, slowly, my hand hovering over my radio. I should call the police, I thought. But what would I tell them? I heard a noise and a door was open. I pushed the door wider and stepped out onto the fire escape landing. The cold air hit me like a slap. The wind was stronger up here, and I could see the city lights spread out below. The fire escape was old, metal, the kind that shakes a little when you walk on it. I looked up. I looked down. Nobody. I went back inside, closed the door firmly, and tested it. Locked. It locked automatically when it closed, which meant someone had opened it from the inside, recently enough that it hadn't closed yet. Or I was losing my mind. I went back downstairs, filed a report about possible intruder unable to locate, and spent the rest of my shift jumping at every sound. When Mike came in at 7 a.m. to relieve me, I told him everything. He just looked at me for a long moment, then said, "Did you go up to the 6th floor?" "No," I said. "Should I have?" "No," he said quickly. "No. Definitely don't go up to the 6th floor alone at night. Just trust me on that." I couldn't let it go, obviously. I spent my days off digging into the building's history, and what I found, it explained a lot, but it also made everything so much worse. The Hartwell building was built in 1952. For most of its life, it was just a normal office building. But in 1987, something happened on the 6th floor. A man named Richard Holloway worked there. He was an accountant for one of the firms. By all accounts, he was quiet, kept to himself, seemed normal. On March 15th, 1987, Richard came to work and murdered 3 of his co-workers before killing himself, all on the 6th floor. Apparently, he'd been embezzling money and was about to be caught. The murder-suicide was his way out. But here's the detail that made my skin crawl. One of his victims was a woman who had brought her 8-year-old daughter to work that day. The daughter witnessed everything. She survived physically, but I can't imagine what that did to her. The 6th floor was closed off after that, completely renovated in the early 90s, but no company would rent the space. Superstition, I guess. It had been vacant ever since. I found old newspaper articles. I found photos. And in one photo from a retrospective piece done in the 90s, I saw the 6th floor hallway. It looked exactly like it did now. Same layout, same doors. And I realized something that made my stomach drop. The fire escape door I'd found open, that was the door Richard's last victim had tried to escape through. She almost made it. I should have quit. I know that now. But I needed the money. And part of me, the stupid part, wanted to know more, wanted to understand what I'd experienced. 3 nights after that first incident, I decided I was going to the 6th floor. Mike had told me not to, but Mike wasn't there, and I had to know. It was 3 a.m., the witching hour, right? I felt ridiculous even thinking that, but the timing felt important somehow. I took the elevator up, watched the numbers light up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The doors opened. The smell hit me immediately. Cigarette smoke, strong and fresh, like someone had just put one out. My eyes started watering. The 6th floor was carpeted, unlike the others. The carpet was old, stained, threadbare in places. The emergency lighting up here was dimmer, or maybe some of the bulbs were out. Shadows seemed deeper. I stepped out of the elevator, and the doors closed behind me with a finality that made my heart race. "Hello?" I called out. My voice barely echoed at all, absorbed by the carpet and the walls. I started walking, checking each door. They were all locked, just like the other floors. The offices were empty, furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. But the air felt wrong. It felt thick, oppressive, like the oxygen was thinner up here. I found myself breathing harder, even though I was just walking. I was about halfway down the main hallway when I heard it. Crying. Someone was crying. It was coming from one of the offices ahead of me. I could see the door. It was one of the larger offices, probably a manager's office back in the day. "Hello?" I said, approaching the door. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" The crying stopped. I tried the door handle. Locked. I put my ear to the door, listening. Silence. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. I jumped back from the door like it had burned me. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "Who's in there?" Scratching. On the other side of the door, like fingernails on wood. Then it wasn't just one door. It was all of them. Every office door in the hallway. Scratching, scratching, scratching. All at once, all around me. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran. I sprinted back to the elevator, slamming my hand on the button over and over. The scratching followed me. It seemed to move down the hallway, keeping pace. "Come on, come on, come on," I muttered, pressing the button. The doors opened. I threw myself inside and hammered the button for the first floor. As the doors closed, I looked down the hallway one last time. A figure stood at the far end. Dark suit, pale face, just standing there, watching me. The doors closed. I made it back to the security office and immediately pulled up the camera feeds. The 6th floor wasn't on the monitors. None of the cameras worked up there. But I rewound the elevator footage. I watched myself get in the elevator on the 1st floor. Watched the numbers go up. Watched the doors open on 6. Watched myself step out. Then, exactly 3 minutes later, I watched myself run back in and frantically press buttons. But here's what made me quit that job. In those 3 minutes, on the timestamp, I was on the 6th floor for 3 minutes. But I had been up there for at least 15 minutes. Maybe 20. Time had moved differently up there. I wrote up my resignation that night. Effective immediately. I didn't even wait for Mike to come in. I left a note and walked out at 5 a.m., 2 hours before my shift ended. I never went back. I did some more research after I left, called some people who had worked in the building over the years, and I found out I wasn't the first guard to experience things on the 6th floor. There had been 4 night guards before me. All of them quit within 3 months. One of them had a nervous breakdown and had to be hospitalized. Mike knew. He'd known the whole time. That's why he'd told me not to go up there alone. The Hartwell building is still there. They've got a new security company now, working in pairs. Nobody works alone anymore. I still drive past it sometimes, on my way to my new job. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can see a light on in one of the 6th floor windows, even though I know the power has been shut off to that floor for 30 years. I don't know what I encountered that night. Maybe it was ghosts. Maybe it was something else. Maybe that building absorbed so much trauma that it became something wrong. something that exists slightly outside normal reality. All I know is this: some places remember. Some places hold on to the worst moments, the worst emotions, and they don't let go. The Hartwell Building is one of those places. And if you ever find yourself in an old building late at night, and something doesn't feel right, trust that feeling. Don't be curious like I was. Just leave. Because some questions aren't worth getting answered. I know it's hard to believe, but I swear to you, every word of it is true.